This week, I was able to secure a phone interview with Representative Hagan. We spoke on a variety of issues and started the interview with her thoughts on the Ohio House passing legislation to defund Planned Parenthood. My first question to
Personally, I certainly don't. I actually sat on the committee that vetted this legislation, and after hearing hours upon hours of testimony, we heard from different perspectives from healthcare providers and recognized that this actually, in essence, provides additional resources to women to be able to find access to care, because we know and understand there are only 28 Planned Parenthood facilities in the entire state of Ohio, and none of which exist in my district, Ohio House District 50. And certainly I serve many women as a legislator, but there are 280 federally qualified healthcare providers in the state of Ohio who will receive those dollars. So it actually creates more points of access, in my opinion, and points of access that do not in any way subsidize what many voters, what many Ohioans believe to be morally, scientifically, ethically unthinkable as far as subsidizing and supporting the promotion of abortion, ending the life of a child.
All right. And next we spoke about her House Bill 69, also known as a heartbeat bill, which would outlaw abortions as soon as a heartbeat is detected. With the bill passing the Ohio House back in March and facing some criticism from fellow Republican colleagues, I asked Hagan, who is a primary sponsor of the bill, on her thoughts on the matter.
It's a duty and role of the legislature to vet and thoroughly take the time to understand, ask questions, and deliberate over any issue that's introduced to their body. And certainly the House has passed that notion that we believe that this would stand through any type of judicial scrutiny. Certainly we stood behind it and we passed it to them, so it would be my hope that they would also go through that process and allow for the committee to vet the legislation. You know, none of us can truly speak to constitutionality other than our interpretation of constitutional rights, and certainly it is the constitutional duty that we have to protect the lives of the unborn. And I would suggest that it's one of the most important and fundamental roles of government to defend the least of these from injustices. And we've seen that in Supreme Court decisions made in the past. For a specific example, partial birth abortion ban, and things that at the time were heavily debated within the legislature and quite honestly were, very controversial at the time of discussion. But without the will of the legislature and the movement of the legislature, the child would not experience that protection. So I do believe it is the will of both houses to expand that protection. And I believe that they will hear the bill. I don't know in what time frame. But it is not the role of the legislature to decide constitutionality. It is the role to provide law. And then if there's a question of that law, then the courts can go through the process in which they're put into place to justify or question that at that point. So I think it's premature to suggest that this legislation is unconstitutional in nature, and many constitutional experts agree.
All right, and for our third question, we continue on the subject of Hagan's own bill, House Bill 69. With the representative bill having the possibility to be brought up before the Supreme Court, I asked her if she felt her bill could renew debates about the abortions not only at the state level, but on the national level as well.
Absolutely, and the intent of the legislation is to expand protection of the unborn, and the only way to accomplish that is by having the courts draw the question and debate precedent that has already been put into place. For example, the courts have previously given strict adherence to the term potential life and synonymous expressions in the Gonzalez case, etc. So there have been doors that have been opened by the Supreme Court themselves that allow for us as a state legislature to recognize there's a window of opportunity to provide care to these unborn children in reasonable measures. And some may say this is an extreme measure, but as we understand from a biological medical standpoint, we know more about the gestational development of the child in the womb than we've ever known. And certainly a fetal heartbeat is an indicator of life. That I think is understood by many, by all. It's really hard to dispute the fact that when a heart stops beating, life ends. Therefore, if a heart is beating, then it's an indicator that life has began, and thus it's the question of that child being due protection. So there are several court cases that actually we have used in the drafting of this legislation to set it up for success at the Supreme Court. And I believe, if you are a person who believes in human rights, this is definitely the human rights issue of our time, without question.
And for my final question, I switched up topics and brought up the passage of Issue 1, earlier this month. The amendment would create a bipartisan committee that would redraw district lines for election purposes. Considering the issue passed with great support on election, I asked whether this amendment would be a step forward to addressing the issue of gerrymandering.
I think that it certainly moves the state in a better direction for more fair discussion as it relates to how the lines are drawn and defined. The way that it actually functions creates a bipartisan effort, so we're having both walks of life, both sides of the aisle participate in the process on either a 10-year or 4-year basis, depending on if that bipartisan effort exists. And so it promotes discussion amongst both parties, and I believe will ultimately result in districts that are not hyperextended one way or the other, which should prove favorable.